Thomas Rogers was a standout student at Riverside High School. At 18, he excelled in math and natural sciences, often competing in school Olympiads and earning state-level awards. His teachers believed he had a bright future ahead and anticipated that he would gain admission to a top university after graduation. Thomas was raised in a middle-class family. His dad was an engineer at a nearby factory, and his mom taught elementary school. His parents encouraged his love for learning and provided everything he needed to grow. Additionally, he lived with his grandmother, who had been involved in his upbringing since he was a child. At school, Thomas was well liked by his classmates. Although he did well academically, he wasn't just a typical nerd. He was involved in school activities, joined various clubs, and played on the basketball team. A significant part of his life was his girlfriend, Hilda Lamb. They started dating at the beginning of their senior year, and their relationship grew serious quickly. Hilda was also a top student, but she had a greater interest in the humanities. She aspired to be a journalist and intended to apply to the journalism department after finishing high school. The Lamb family was well known in Riverside. Hilda's father, George, ran a small but successful law firm, while her mother, Polly, was a realtor and actively involved in the community. She took part in different charity events and served on the school's parent committee. At first, Thomas and Hilda's relationship looked perfect. They frequently attended school events together, helped each other with their studies, and talked about their future. Their parents supported the relationship, viewing them as a promising couple. However, beneath this surface, a serious secret was hidden that Hilda and the people in Riverside didn't know about. Thomas had secretly started a relationship with Hilda's 43-year-old mother, Polly Lamb. What began a few months ago slowly developed into an obsession for both of them. August 17th started as a typical summer day in Riverside. The sky was clear, and it was warm, with residents going about their routines. Thomas Rogers woke up early, as he usually did during the school year. Even though it was summer break, he stuck to his routine, getting ready for college admissions. The house was peaceful, his parents had already gone to work, and his grandmother, who lived with him, was still asleep. Thomas planned to spend the morning studying for his entrance exams. He sat at his desk and opened a textbook, not realizing that this day would be his last. Around 7:30 in the morning, Thomas heard the front door open. He thought it was just a family member coming home. A few minutes later, his bedroom door opened quietly. In the soft morning light, he saw the familiar shape of Polly Lamb. Thomas wasn't surprised to see her so early. Their secret meetings had become a regular thing over the past few months, and he was used to her unexpected visits. He greeted her, not realizing the danger that was about to come. Polly didn't arrive for a meeting. Instead, she was filled with rage and held a kitchen knife in her hand. Without a word, she charged at Thomas, catching him off guard with the first stab to his chest. He attempted to defend himself, but Polly, fueled by anger, kept attacking him relentlessly. She pressed a pillow against his face to muffle his screams. During the struggle, she nearly injured his eyes. Though it lasted just a few minutes, it felt like forever to Thomas. He fought back and tried to call for help, but his strength was fading fast. In his final moments, he thought of his family, Hilda, and the dreams he wouldn't fulfill. When it was finished, the room was covered in blood. Thomas's body was on the floor, cut up by several stab wounds. Polly, understanding what she had done, ran away in fear, forgetting the knife at the scene. She sneaked out of the house as quietly as she had come in, leaving behind a terrifying sight. For hours after the murder, the Rogers house was quiet. Around 10 o'clock, Thomas's grandmother, Martha Rogers, woke up and noticed the absence of the usual sounds from her grandson. By that time, Thomas would typically be having breakfast or studying in his room. Martha knocked on his door but got no response. When she tried to enter, she found the door locked from the inside. Worried about Thomas, she called her neighbor, Susan Parker, for help. Susan arrived quickly, and together they tried to reach Thomas again. When that didn't work, they decided to call the police. Officer John Martinez got to the scene 15 minutes after receiving the call. After looking around, he decided to kick in the door. What he and the others saw was shocking. Thomas's body was on the floor in a pool of blood. The room was a mess, showing that a struggle had occurred. Martha Rogers fainted when she saw her grandson's body. Susan called for an ambulance, and Officer Martinez asked for backup and forensic teams. Within an hour, the Rogers house had turned into a crime scene. Detectives from the homicide department arrived, and forensic experts began collecting evidence. Thomas's body was carefully examined at the crime scene before being sent to the morgue for an autopsy. Detective Sarah Collins, an experienced investigator from the homicide department, led the investigation. She began by questioning Martha Rogers and Susan Parker, trying to establish Thomas's last known actions and any unusual events preceding his death. Forensic experts found the murder weapon, a kitchen knife, left at the crime scene. They also collected blood samples, hair, and fingerprints. A preliminary examination showed that the killer was likely familiar to the victim, as there were no signs of forced entry. Thomas's parents, upon receiving the terrible news, immediately returned home. They were questioned separately, trying to establish if Thomas had any enemies or problems they might have known about. Both parents were in a state of shock and couldn't believe what had happened. News of the brutal murder spread quickly through Riverside. The city's residents were shocked and frightened. The police increased street patrols, trying to calm the worried citizens. By the evening of the same day, Detective Collins had compiled a preliminary list of suspects and witnesses for interrogation. Among them were Thomas's classmates, his teachers, and of course, the Lambs. The investigators didn't yet know that the key to solving this crime was closer than they could have imagined. During the investigation, Detective Sarah Collins and her team methodically questioned everyone connected to Thomas Rogers. Special attention was paid to his closest circle. Polly Lamb felt a mix of emotions, regret, anxiety, and a lingering sense of denial. She knew the weight of her confession, yet the reality of her actions seemed surreal. In the meeting with Michael Stern, her attorney, they discussed the possibility of pleading not guilty by reason of temporary insanity, given the evidence of her emotional instability. Stern emphasized the importance of presenting Polly as a woman overwhelmed by her circumstances rather than a malicious perpetrator. As the trial date approached, the media frenzy surrounding the case intensified. Reports delved into the Lamb family's life, revealing details about Polly's career and her community involvement, while speculating on the motivations behind her actions. The public was captivated by the scandal of a respected lawyer's wife committing murder, creating a narrative that both fascinated and horrified them. In preparation for the trial, the prosecution worked diligently to solidify their case. They planned to highlight the numerous text messages exchanged between Polly and Thomas, which suggested a deeply inappropriate and obsessive relationship. The prosecution also intended to call witnesses who would testify to Polly's erratic behavior leading up to the murder, framing her as a woman consumed by jealousy and desperation. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was packed, with journalists filling the seats and members of the community eager to witness the proceedings. As the prosecution laid out its case, Polly sat quietly, her demeanor a mix of resignation and anxiety. The evidence against her was substantial, and she knew that her fate hung in the balance. Witness after witness described the relationship between Polly and Thomas, revealing how it had blossomed into something more than just an acquaintance. Text messages were displayed on the screen, some intimate and suggestive, sparking murmurs in the courtroom. The prosecution aimed to portray Polly as a woman who had crossed ethical boundaries, unable to accept that her daughter was in a relationship with the man she had come to obsess over. As the defense took their turn, Stern attempted to humanize Polly, emphasizing her past accomplishments and her dedication to her family. He painted a picture of a woman who had lost control due to emotional turmoil rather than one who had intentionally sought to harm Thomas. The defense's strategy focused on Polly's mental health, presenting expert testimony to support the claim of her obsession and unstable behavior. Hilda sat in the gallery, grappling with the unfolding drama. Each piece of evidence felt like a stab to her heart, forcing her to confront the betrayal and loss. She listened to her mother's defense, torn between wanting to understand and feeling disgusted by the actions that had led to Thomas's death. As the trial progressed, Hilda's emotions became increasingly complex. She felt empathy for her mother as the defense argued her instability, yet she also harbored deep anger for the pain Polly had caused her. The courtroom became a battleground of emotions, with loyalty and betrayal clashing in the most devastating way. After several days of testimonies and arguments, the jury was finally sent to deliberate. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as everyone awaited the verdict. Hilda hoped for some semblance of justice but was also haunted by the reality of what her family had become. When the jury returned, the foreman announced the verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs. Hilda felt a rush of conflicting emotions: relief, anger, sadness. The judge sentenced Polly to a lengthy prison term, emphasizing the gravity of her actions and the impact they had on multiple lives. As the gavel fell, Hilda faced the reality of her situation. Her mother would be going to prison, and she would have to navigate life without the support of the woman who had raised her. The aftermath of the trial left Hilda grappling with her grief and loss, striving to find a way to heal from the scars that would forever mark her family. In the weeks that followed, Hilda sought therapy to process the trauma of the events. She focused on honoring Thomas's memory, reflecting on their relationship and the happiness they had shared. Hilda learned to lean on her friends and family for support, determined to move forward and reclaim her life from the shadows of her mother's actions. Polly's imprisonment became a painful chapter in their family history, a story of obsession and tragedy that resonated throughout Riverside. Hilda hoped that, in time, the scars would heal and that she could find peace amidst the chaos that had changed her life forever. Records, text messages, and forensic evidence. Detective Collins's testimony underscored the meticulous nature of the investigation, revealing how Polly's obsession with Thomas had been documented in their communications. The prosecution highlighted the numerous intimate messages exchanged between Polly and Thomas, painting a vivid picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and desperation. As the trial progressed, the emotional weight of the testimonies became palpable. Thomas's parents shared heart-wrenching stories of their son's dreams and aspirations, showcasing the profound impact of his loss on their family. The courtroom was silent as they recounted the moment they received the devastating news of Thomas's murder, their grief a stark reminder of the life taken too soon. Hilda's testimony was particularly poignant. She spoke about her love for Thomas and the betrayal she felt from both her mother and her boyfriend. Her voice trembled as she described the confusion and pain of learning that her mother was involved in the tragedy. The courtroom held its breath, sensing the deep anguish that echoed in Hilda's words. Polly, sitting at the defendant's table, appeared visibly affected, her eyes filled with remorse as she listened to her daughter's testimony. The defense attempted to counter the prosecution's narrative by emphasizing Polly's mental state at the time of the murder. Attorney Stern called mental health experts to the stand, who testified that Polly had shown signs of emotional distress leading up to the crime. They argued that her obsessive thoughts about Thomas had reached a breaking point, leading to a moment of temporary insanity. Stern urged the jury to consider the emotional turmoil that had driven Polly to such desperate actions, suggesting that she was a victim of her circumstances rather than a cold-blooded murderer. Despite the defense's efforts, the prosecution maintained a strong case, emphasizing the premeditated nature of the crime. They pointed out that Polly had sought out Thomas that day with the intention of ending his relationship with Hilda, demonstrating a clear motive rooted in obsession. The prosecution highlighted the brutality of the murder, describing how Polly had repeatedly stabbed Thomas, painting a picture of a woman who had lost control but had initially set out to confront him. As the trial continued, jurors found themselves grappling with the complexities of the case. Many expressed sympathy for Polly's emotional struggles but also felt the weight of the evidence against her. The trial had become a reflection of deeper societal issues, obsession, betrayal, and the consequences of unchecked emotions. Closing arguments were made after 2 weeks of intense testimony. Prosecutor Harris reiterated the tragic outcome of Polly's actions, imploring the jury to hold her accountable for the devastating impact on both families. He emphasized that while emotions could run high, they could never justify taking a life. Meanwhile, Attorney Stern urged the jury to consider the nuances of Polly's mental state, appealing to their compassion and understanding of her struggles. After the closing statements, the jury was sent to deliberate. Tension filled the courtroom as the families of both Thomas and Polly awaited the verdict. Hilda sat with her friends and family, her heart racing as she tried to prepare for whatever news awaited them. Finally, after hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman stood to announce the verdict, and the room fell silent. "We find the defendant, Polly Lamb, guilty of second-degree murder." Gasps erupted in the courtroom as the reality of the verdict set in. Hilda felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but at what cost? Polly, visibly shaken, broke down in tears, realizing the gravity of her actions and their consequences. Judge Morgan announced the sentencing phase would begin immediately, with the prosecution seeking a substantial prison term for Polly. As the courtroom emptied, Hilda faced her mother for the first time since the trial began. Their eyes met, a moment of unspoken understanding passing between them, pain, betrayal, and a profound sense of loss that would forever shape their lives. As Polly was led away, Hilda grappled with her conflicting feelings. She had lost not only the love of her life but also her mother to a tragic spiral of obsession and violence. The road ahead would be difficult, but she knew she had to find a way to heal and honor Thomas's memory while navigating the fallout of her family's brokenness. In the weeks following the trial, the Riverside community remained in shock, grappling with the repercussions of the high-profile case. The Lamb and Rogers families became the focus of intense media scrutiny, their personal tragedies laid bare for public consumption. Hilda, still reeling from the betrayal of both her mother and Thomas, found solace in the support of friends and family, but the weight of her grief was ever present. Hilda spent her days trying to navigate her new reality. She often visited Thomas's grave, bringing flowers and talking to him about her feelings, her hopes, and the memories they had shared. Each visit brought her a sense of peace, a connection to the love they had built together. Yet, she also felt an overwhelming sadness at the loss of their future, plans, dreams, and a life that would never be. The trial had left a deep scar on the community. Riverside, once a quiet town, was now a backdrop for discussions about obsession, mental health, and the complexities of relationships. Many residents expressed disbelief that someone like Polly, an upstanding member of the community, could commit such a heinous act. Town meetings were held to discuss support for mental health resources, prompted by the shocking revelations surrounding Polly's behavior and state of mind leading up to the murder. Meanwhile, Polly faced the stark reality of her new life in prison. Her days were filled with reflection and regret as she navigated the confines of her cell. While she was aware of the pain she had inflicted, the enormity of her actions weighed heavily on her. She sought therapy to address her obsessive behavior and emotional turmoil, trying to understand the motivations behind her actions. The therapy sessions brought up difficult questions and memories, forcing her to confront her past relationships and the choices that led to that fateful day. As time passed, Hilda began to find her footing. She immersed herself in activities that brought her joy, joining a local art class where she could express her emotions through painting. The canvas became her refuge, a space where she could process her grief and channel her feelings into something tangible. With every brushstroke, she felt a sense of liberation, as if she were slowly reclaiming her identity apart from the tragedy that had defined her. Support groups also became an essential part of Hilda's healing process. She connected with others who had experienced loss, finding comfort in shared stories and understanding. Through these connections, she learned that while her pain was unique, it was also a part of the human experience. The group became a safe space where she could express her emotions without judgment, allowing her to begin the healing journey that had felt impossible at first. Polly, too, faced her demons head-on. The initial shock of her conviction had worn off, replaced by a determination to better herself. Through therapy, she began to understand the root of her obsessive behavior, her fear of losing control and the deep-seated insecurities that had fueled her actions. The road to self-forgiveness would be long, but she was committed to confronting the pain she had caused. As the months rolled on, the media frenzy surrounding the case subsided, but the scars remained. Hilda eventually found the strength to share her story, advocating for mental health awareness and the importance of addressing emotional struggles. She collaborated with local organizations to create programs that offered support to those dealing with relationship issues and mental health challenges, hoping to prevent other families from experiencing the same tragedy. The transformation in Hilda was profound. While she would always carry the weight of her loss, she emerged from the darkness with a renewed sense of purpose. She learned to cherish the memories of Thomas, finding ways to celebrate his life rather than solely mourn his death. Each year, she organized a memorial art exhibit in his honor, showcasing the works of young artists in the community, providing a platform for creativity while keeping Thomas's memory alive. For Polly, her time in prison became a catalyst for profound change. She participated in educational programs, earned her GED, and explored her passion for writing. Through her writing, she began to express her regrets and hopes for redemption, crafting letters that detailed her journey of self-discovery. Though she knew she could never undo the past, she hoped to find a way to make amends through her personal growth and insights gained during her time behind bars. Years later, as Hilda stood before a crowd at the annual memorial art exhibit, she spoke of resilience, love, and the importance of addressing mental health. Her voice resonated with strength as she recounted her journey from grief to healing, emphasizing the power of community and support. In that moment, she honored Thomas's memory not just as a victim, but as a beacon of hope for others navigating their struggles. Polly, now on the path to eventual release, watched from afar as Hilda spoke. She felt a mixture of pride and sadness, knowing that her daughter had turned the pain of their past into something beautiful. Polly knew she had a long way to go in seeking forgiveness, but witnessing Hilda's strength gave her hope that perhaps one day, they could reconnect and rebuild their relationship. Though the shadows of the past would always linger, both Hilda and Polly were determined to find their way forward, honoring the memory of Thomas while working to heal the wounds that had torn their lives apart. Their journey would be complex and fraught with challenges, but they were united by the hope of redemption, love, and the possibility of new beginnings. The story of Polly Lamb and Thomas Rogers lingered in the minds of Riverside residents long after the trial concluded, serving as a catalyst for important conversations about mental health, relationships, and community support. In the wake of the tragedy, various initiatives were launched, including the Thomas Rogers Foundation, which provided scholarships and mental health resources for families affected by violent crime. Determined to honor their son's memory, Thomas's parents collaborated with local schools to implement programs focused on awareness and violence prevention, while Hilda, who sought refuge away from Riverside, became a powerful advocate for mental health resources, sharing her journey from pain to purpose. Riverside High School revamped its curriculum to include lessons on healthy relationships, emotional intelligence, and conflict resolution, equipping students with tools to recognize unhealthy dynamics. The Riverside Police Department also enhanced training regarding domestic violence, fostering a closer bond with the community. As the town began to heal, local media shifted its focus from sensationalism to education, promoting resilience and recovery stories, while community events organized by the Riverside City Council restored unity among residents. Years later, the story of Polly and Thomas remained a poignant reminder of the complexities of human emotions, with a memorial dedicated to Thomas serving as a gathering place for reflection and remembrance. The case became a subject of study in universities across the country, sparking discussions on the intersections of mental health, family dynamics, and societal pressures. Though the scars from the tragedy would never fully heal, Riverside emerged as a stronger community that learned the importance of vigilance in relationships, the necessity of seeking help, and the power of compassion. The legacy of Thomas Rogers and the cautionary tale of Polly Lamb transformed Riverside into a place prioritizing healing and supporting one another, turning the memory of a young man lost too soon into a beacon for positive change. Ultimately, the town became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, where the past informed the future, and hope blossomed in the aftermath of tragedy.